Okay, so now that you've been given an overview of Chapter 4, what we need to talk about are the different processes and the inputs, tools, and techniques and outputs of those processes. So this is an ITTO review for Chapter 4, Project Integration Management. Before I get started, let me mention that if you're interested, we have lots of free PMP prep materials at projectprep.org. We've got cheat sheets, full-length practice tests, note cards, lots of stuff that should be pretty helpful. Just as a reminder, integration management is really the bridge between the different process groups. It kind of brings everything together. That's why it's talked about first. And I kind of think of it as the glue that brings everything together. And as a reminder, there's 7 processes. 1 is in initiating, 1 in planning, 2 in executing and monitoring, controlling, and then 1 in closing. So with developing the project charter, we're authorizing the project and providing the PM with authority. We're getting authority now to start using resources. And then as we develop the project management plan, we're creating that foundational or fundamental or central project document, which is really integrating subsidiary plans into a comprehensive project plan. And as we direct and manage the project work, we're performing the project work as we've outlined it in the plan and implementing approved changes. Managing project knowledge is all about creating and using knowledge to support the organization. So remember, as we execute projects, we generate data about a variety of things. We learn a lot of things, and we can apply it to our current project or to a future project potentially. And then we're going to monitor and control the project work. It's kind of like taking our project to the doctor. It's tracking and reporting progress against objectives. We're trying to see how things are going, to see if we're healthy or not. And then we're going to perform integrated change control, reviewing and approving change requests, communicating decisions, so on. And then we're going to close the project phase. Close project phase is the only process in the closing process group. As a reminder here, the 2 key documents, the project charter, with authorizing the project and giving the PM authority, and the project management plan integrates various plans together. And remember, it's the path to achieve the project objectives. So let's take a look at the inputs, tools, and techniques and outputs for the first process, developing the project charter. And remember, this is authorizing the project and providing the PM with authority. So here's a glance at those inputs, tools, and techniques and outputs. You've got, and remember, maybe we want to start with the output first. So there's the project charter, and then also something called the assumption log. We want to be tracking assumptions as we go throughout the project. And obviously the project charter, that's our key output. And some of the inputs are going to be business documents. They're going to talk about our benefits and the costs attached to it to see if there's a good reason to start the project. There could be other agreements, whether in an email, a handshake, or a contract or something. And then enterprise environmental factors and organizational process assets. We've already talked about those a little bit, but we'll come back to them. And there's tools and techniques we use. We use expert judgment. We get advice from experts, especially in our field. And then we gather data, we do some brainstorming, focus groups, interviews perhaps. And then we use interpersonal skills. We got to work with sponsors and stakeholders if we get things kicked off. So we might manage some conflict if there is some, maybe facilitation, holding some meetings, getting everybody ready and on the same page as we prepare to authorize the project. So let's talk about the business case and the benefits management plan as well as agreements. These are kind of business documents that are going to be key inputs to developing the project charter. So on the left, you're going to see the business case, which includes the cost benefit analysis. Obviously, the benefits need to outweigh the costs, and we probably want to compare those benefits and costs to other similar projects. And then our benefits management plan, describing how benefits from the project will be maintained over time. Obviously, we want those benefits to last. If we're going to spend money on this project and we expect sustaining benefits, we want to make sure that those last and that we monitor those. So those 2 documents are what we call business documents. And there could be other agreements which define the initial project intentions. They could be written, verbal, in an email or whatever. Now here's an example of a business case that we talked about. A $500,000 project to add automation in our factory could cut labor costs by $1.2 million annually. So we're talking about the benefits as well as the costs. This again is going to be a key input to the project charter. And then we could have other agreements. This is just an example of an email agreement, but you could have a handshake. It could be a conversation in the hallway at the water cooler or something. Some reason or agreement, whether official or not, to get the project started. Obviously, we still want to create the project charter, our key output. Let's also talk about organizational process assets. That's a key input, and it's a key input on many projects. Remember, these are plans, processes, policies, and knowledge bases specific to the organization. And so there's really two categories of organizational process assets. We have process and procedures and databases specific to the organization that may be important inputs. Here's an example. Templates. If an organization has templates that we need to be using for our project, whether it's for a schedule template, a project management plan template, a risk register template, that's going to be an input to, in this case, if there's a project charter template, that's what we'd be using. That's going to be important. We need to know that. That's going to be an input. And then also enterprise environmental factors. Remember, these are conditions not under the control of the project team that could influence the project. Things like organizational culture, structure and governance, existing human resources, marketplace conditions, political climate. These are conditions that are not under our control, but certainly affect how we manage our project. And then there's expert judgment. This is one of the tools and techniques, and we're going to see this over and over again. Basically, it's somebody giving us advice, somebody that perhaps has done a similar project before or has expertise in our industry or field, our product. They're going to provide some helpful advice as we start to kick the project off. Here's an example. They might say, I've constructed a building like this before, and I know we're proposing this new one. I'd suggest we take this approach. Or I estimate at a high level that it might cost us this much. That's expert judgment on the project. That's going to help us develop the project charter. Okay, let's talk about for a minute about one of the interpersonal skills that could be used as a tool on this process. So facilitators lead groups in brainstorming and problem-solving activities. This might be important at this stage of the project because as you're getting ready to kick it off, the project charter, which you're going to use as your basis of authorization, might have a high-level scope in it. It's not going to have detailed scope, but maybe at a high level you start, brainstorming as a team, as a department, or whatever, as a project team about different ways of completing the project work. It's just facilitation, leading groups in brainstorming and problem-solving activities to figure out the different options for getting this work done. And then there's meetings. This is not rocket science here. It's a tool of developing the project charter. Here's a few things that the PMBOK says about meetings. There's a few different types. You could just be exchanging information. You could be brainstorming or evaluating options or making decisions. And here's some of the best practices for meetings that they provide to us. The meeting should have a well-defined agenda, purpose, objective, and time. Minutes and action items should be captured. And minutes should be stored as we define in the project management plan. And they say that the meetings are most effective when they're face-to-face. Doesn't mean a virtual meeting can't be effective, but they just say meetings that are most effective when they're face-to-face. And each attendee should have a defined role. So they kind of have to know what your role is at the meeting or after the meeting. And action items should be clearly defined. The minutes should be shared. Has to be a reason for why you're meeting, essentially. Okay. And here are our key outputs of this process, the project charter, obviously, and an assumption log. So our project charter, if you recall, authorizes the project and provides the PM with authority to start using resources. We don't want to move forward until we have this authorization. In addition to the project charter, one output is going to be the assumption log. It contains info about assumptions and constraints. Here's an example of an assumption or a constraint. On this construction project, we assume that there will be roofing contractors that are available and capable to work on the project when we need them. That's an assumption we're making. Maybe there's other construction projects in the city that are, taking away many of the roofing contractors that would normally be available. That's an assumption we're making as we're developing our plans. It's going to be important to track and monitor. Okay, now that we've created the project charter, now we're going to be working in the planning process group about to develop the project management plan. Remember, this is integrating subsidiary plans into a comprehensive project plan. And here are the inputs, the tools and techniques and outputs I want to focus in on a few of those. The first thing that I think it's important to note is that a key input is going to be the project charter. This is an important concept. Oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes, outputs from previous processes become inputs to the next ones. So in Develop Project Charter, our output was the project charter, and it's going to be an input here. The project charter is going to be a key input as we put together our project management plan. And obviously the key output here is the project management plan. So the way that it works is there's the developing the project charter process and initiating. The output is the project charter and it becomes an input to this process. And then there's also what we call outputs from other processes. If you recall, the project management plan is integrating a lot of different plans together. And remember, the way that we remember what documents or plans or baselines are inside the PMP or the project management plan is if they end in plan or baseline. Those are outputs, what you're seeing here, outputs from other processes or previous processes. Then the key output is the project management plan. And obviously I kind of skipped over it, but there's a couple other inputs: enterprise environmental factors and organizational process assets. There are things both inside and outside of the organization that could affect our planning. And then you've got different tools and techniques too: expert judgment, ways to gather data, brainstorming, checklists, focus groups, interviews. And then we could be using conflict management, meeting management, other techniques for really putting our plan together. We're getting expert advice, meeting with stakeholders, hashing out our plan. Anyway, getting back to the key output here, the only output, I guess, the project management plan. Remember, it's the central project document. It's going to state how the project is completed, and it's progressively elaborated. And it should be consistent with the program plan if there is one. And again, remember, it looks at everything: cost, schedule, scope, resources, communications, risks, all of it. Brings it all together. Okay, now that we've got the project authorized, we've planned it, we're going to now be directing and managing the project work. Just performing the project work as we've defined it in the plan and implementing approved changes if we have some. There's several inputs, tools, and techniques and outputs of this process. One of the key tools I want to focus in on here is the Project Management Information System. Really, this is a tool to gather and share outputs of project management processes. Really, there's just lots of documentation and data that gets generated. It's a good place to store them. It supports all aspects of the project, can be manual or automated. So that's just saying it's a tool. We're tracking some of these things, tracking the data that gets generated from the project. The key output here are going to be deliverables. Deliverables are, as we execute the project, whatever we generate, whatever we're producing as part of the project. Before I talk a little bit more about deliverables, let me just talk about some of the inputs and other tools and techniques and outputs. So the project management plan, that's going to be an input because the plan is going to tell us how to get the work done. It's our plan for what we're going to execute on. We got to know our plan to know what we need to do. There's other project documents too: change log, lessons learned register, communication schedule, a requirements matrix, several things that could be used to help us execute on the project. Lots of, and you're not going to have to memorize all these, but just to give you an idea, there's several inputs that document inputs that could help us execute the work. One thing I really want to focus in on here is towards the bottom: approved change requests. And actually, I may come back to this in just a second here, but as we're executing the project, remember, things don't always go as planned, and so we may have to make changes. Obviously, those are going to go through the change control board like we've talked about before. If those get reviewed and approved, we're going to input them here. They're going to become an input to this process. As we get the work done, we make changes and incorporate those changes. Okay, but let's talk about deliverables. Remember, deliverables are the key output as we direct and manage the work, as we get it done. Now, I'm going to come back to this diagram several times throughout a variety of videos, but I just want to first introduce it to you. I know it's a lot to digest, but I want to start discussing it. So if you look on the left here, you're going to see this process: direct and manage project work. That's an executing process. An output of that are going to be deliverables. That's the results of the project. And they become an input to a process we're going to talk about later, controlling quality. As we produce deliverables, whatever it is, whether it's a building, whether it's software code, we want to check those things for quality. That's what we're doing in the control quality process. And after we check quality, an output is going to be verified deliverables. Deliverables we've checked to see if they're correct. So you could start to see how there's a lot of repetition in these ITTOs, and a lot of them just flow down. So deliverables, they just change over time. We produce them, we check them for quality, and later, which we'll talk about, we're going to get them accepted and approved by the customer, and they become accepted deliverables. Okay, so we'll come back to that. Let me talk about another key output, change requests. As we get the work done, again, things are not going to go as planned. Maybe we can't, the materials that we were expecting, the steel that we needed was going to be low-cost steel, but for whatever reason, there's a disruption in supply and we can't get it when we need it. So we've got to go to a different supplier or use a different type of steel, a different grade. That all may be a change request that get generated. We have to make a change to the project. So naturally, that's an output. And I'm going to show you another diagram here, which again, this is something we're going to come back to over time. But what you're going to see again here on the left is our current process that we're talking about, directing and managing the project work. As we start getting the work done, an output is going to be, or one output is going to be change requests. A change request is going to be an output of this. Again, things don't go as planned. We have to make adjustments. And then what's going to happen is it becomes an input later to the process on the right, perform integrated change control. That's where we're going to be reviewing and approving changes. And then if those changes get approved there, they're going to come back up, and you're going to see those up at the top. Approved changes are going to come back and be an input to directing and managing the project work. Become an input to this next, to the current process we're talking about, because we incorporate them into what we're doing. One other thing I want to talk about, another output, is work performance data. Now, as we're executing the project, getting it done, naturally data is going to get generated about what we're doing. Things like how much we're spending, how fast we're getting things done, what risks we're facing. All of that is data that gets generated from the project. And so here's another key diagram, and I wouldn't stress too much yet about these last three diagrams I've showed you because we're going to bring them back up again and again. I just want to expose them to you first. But as we direct and manage the project work, we're going to generate work performance data about how things are, and it's just real raw data. What we're going to do eventually through other controlling processes where we're kind of like going to the doctor to check to see how things are going, is we're going to turn that data into useful information. If we have data about how much we're actually spending, we want to turn that into information and be able to say, are we over or under spending? And based on that, what adjustments do we need to make to the project? That's useful information, and then we'll put them in reports later. That's just a reminder of work performance data, information, and reports, and the distinctions between those. So work performance data is raw observations. Examples are start and finish dates of scheduled activities, actual costs, actual durations. Work performance information is then taking that data, collecting it, analyzing it, and integrating it in some useful way. So it might tell us the status of deliverables and forecasted estimates to complete. How much, by forecast, we're thinking, how much more do we have to spend to get the project work done? That's useful information that we would then go down and put on a report, just some physical or electronic version. This information used to support decisions, awareness, and issue resolution. Examples include things like status reports, memos, dashboards, recommendations. Those are all types of reports. And here's an example of project, just one specific example of these types of project information. Under data, and it should really say it took 6 weeks to paint the office building. So if that's data, it's just how long it took to paint. We then need to analyze that and turn it into information. Since this was on the critical path, our entire project is delayed 3 weeks because painting took 3 weeks longer than expected. So in reports, this is just not exactly what the report would look like, but we talk about that 3-week delay and what we're going to do to address it. Okay, so there's directing and managing the project work. Now we're going to talk about managing project knowledge, creating and using knowledge to support the project or the organization. These are, as a reminder, as we generate data from the project, we start to learn what's working and what's not working. And then we can use that on our current project and on future projects. That's knowledge, useful knowledge that we can use to support our current project and the organization. So here's what the inputs, tools, and techniques and outputs look like. The key output here is the lessons learned register. We're tracking lessons learned we want to apply to our current project or to future projects. Some of the inputs are going to be the project management plan, a few other project documents, and then deliverables, as well as enterprise environmental factors and organizational process assets. So we're looking at our plan, and then our deliverables, what we created, and we're kind of going to do some comparisons between the two. And then we're going to use techniques of knowledge management, information management, and other interpersonal skills to kind of pull out lessons or things that we were learning from the project. We don't want to repeat the same mistakes in the future. We want to be able to pull out useful lessons that we can apply to future projects. A lot of times when I would manage a project, when we got to the end of it, we would meet as a team and talk about what worked and what didn't work, and then share that with other teams working on similar projects, or remember that for future projects. And one of the things that I like about this is managing project knowledge. They've put it in the executing process group because it should really not just be done at the end of the project, but throughout the project as you're getting the work done. So the lessons learned register helps future teams easily identify relevant lessons. You avoid repeating mistakes. You want to avoid that. Okay, now we're going to talk about monitor and control project work, and this is in the obviously monitoring, controlling process group. So we're tracking and reporting project progress against objectives. It's kind of like going to the doctor. Okay, so there's plenty of ITTOs here. Let's just focus in on a few of them. Now, the project management plan is going to be a key input, as well as work performance information. Those are two on the left-hand side here because we need to compare our plan, what we plan to do, against what actually happened. And we're going to get a good idea of that in work performance information. It also could include agreements and enterprise environmental factors and organizational process assets, as well as a variety of other project documents. Again, you don't necessarily have to memorize these. You just have to kind of understand that there's what we're doing in this process. We're going to the doctor, checking to see how if our project is healthy. What do we need to help us to do that? And then in the tools section, we're going to use just different analytical techniques. Cost-benefit analysis, root cause analysis, trend analysis. Just trying to see if our project is on track, and if not, why not, and what do we do about it. Can also use decision-making and meetings to support that. Okay, let's talk about some of the outputs. Two that I want to focus in on are cost forecasts and schedule forecasts. So as we check the progress of the project, we do some analysis to figure out if we're on track and how much longer it's going to take to get the work done and how much it's going to cost us. We're going to generate these two things, cost and schedule forecasts. So these are an estimate based on information available at the time of the forecast. Considers past performance and expected future performance. We're forecasting out to the future. Now, other things I want to mention here too is that the outputs of this are going to be work performance reports and change requests. So we're taking that information you see as an input, work performance information, and turning it into a report. We're going to share that then with our stakeholders or appropriate stakeholders. And we may also have change requests as an output. So again, naturally, as we get the work of the project done, things won't or may not go as planned. And so we've got to make adjustments and changes to it. And we want to review those changes in an integrated fashion. And we'll talk about that process in a minute. And oftentimes in these monitoring and controlling processes, you have updates to project documents or to the project management plan. So you see those two categories at the bottom right, project management plan updates and project documents updates. So again, you got to make adjustments and you learn more about the work as you go along, so you're improving and updating that documentation. Okay, now let's skip ahead to the other process and monitoring and controlling in this process group. Perform integrated change control. we're reviewing and approving change requests and communicating decisions. Now, if you recall, integrated change control is reviewing and approving changes in the context of the overall project plans. And we're managing changes to deliverables, project documents, and etc. Remember, this is not configuration control. This is change control we're talking about. And it can be conducted at any time during the project and can be requested by any stakeholder, and it must be written. That's really important. And it should include estimated time and cost impacts. And only approved changes should go into a revised baseline. That's like our official approved version of our plan for our costs and our schedule and our scope. So here's a look at the ITTOs. Again, don't get overwhelmed by this. Let me focus in on some of them here. On the left-hand side, you're going to see your plan, components of your project management plan, and think about what plans you would need to do this. You need a change management plan because that's going to tell you how to manage changes on your project. And there's going to be configuration management plan, which is going to tell you how you're going to manage changes to your product. And then your scope baseline. We're going to talk about the scope baseline as well as the schedule baseline and the cost baseline. Those are, remember, our approved versions of our plans, and we're reviewing changes to those. That's why they become an input here. We're reviewing changes to those things. And then you've got a few other project documents like a basis of estimates, which we're going to talk about, and an RTM and a risk report. We'll come back to those. You've also got work performance reports, change requests, and enterprise environmental factors and organizational process assets. We see those again and again. Now, one other thing I want to mention here too is that, remember, we've got our plan and what actually happened, our project management plan and work performance reports. And we're comparing our plans against our actuals in a lot of these monitoring and controlling processes. Okay, so we've got some tools and techniques here too. And a couple I want to notice here, and I'll kind of explain why it's not really that helpful to memorize these things. First of all, there's too many, but you kind of want to be thinking about what the process does, and then the ITTOs become, just makes sense. Think about, or look under the tools section here under data analysis. You see alternatives analysis and cost benefit analysis. Think about it. If we're reviewing changes in the context of our overall project plans, maybe we want to look at alternatives for changes. Maybe there's a different way of doing it. Maybe if we make a certain change, it's going to be have a significant impact on our cost and our schedule. Maybe there's some alternative option that we can consider that would be better and be less impactful. And you could use decision making, and the change control board could use voting, other decision making techniques, and obviously you're going to have meetings as you discuss these changes. So just makes sense. You got to think about the process, and the ITTOs start to become more obvious. And then the outputs are going to be approved change requests. Obviously, if the change gets approved, it's beginning to become an output here. And then updates to the project management plan and other project documents. Remember, updates to documentation are oftentimes outputs on these monitoring and controlling processes. Let me talk about a couple of things here, though. Change control tools. This is just some tool we're using to support managing changes. Something that I've used in the past for managing changes is Microsoft SharePoint. There's other tools for doing that. But it assists with change and or configuration management. It supports the activities of the CCB. It can be manual or automated. And so maybe there's some automated tool that sends out change documentation that tells you the change that's being requested and the impacts to it, and allows people to go into some system and review and approve those changes. Could be an example. And this is just an example of a change log. Anyway, this could be an output or something that we're updating as we're going through this process, and we're just going to track whether things got approved or not. And then we've got approved change requests. Now what I want to do is go back to this visual that we've looked at before. As we direct and manage the project work, and as we monitor and control the project work, change requests are going to be a key output here. They could be outputs of other processes too, but these are two key ones. And then we're going to take those change requests and review them in this process, perform integrated change control. And then an output of that process, or two outputs, there's two key outputs. One is going to be approved changes, if changes get approved, and then a change log, a comprehensive list of changes. Okay, so that was perform integrated change control. Now what I want to do is talk about close project or phase, the last process in this knowledge area. Nothing crazy about this. We're just formally completing the project or phase. Maybe there's some legal things that we have to tie down. It's just making sure that everything gets officially closed, and we can get started on the next project. Okay, so here's the ITTOs, and the inputs are going to be the project charter and the project management plan, at least two key inputs. And so remember, that's our plan. We're going to have other project documents. Again, you don't have to worry so much about memorizing those. And then you have accepted deliverables, business documents, agreements, procurement documentation, so on. Let me explain why you need some of those things. So we've got our plan. Now we want to compare that to our accepted deliverables and also to other business documents that we created at the start of the project. We want to see if what we planned or the benefits that we estimated actually were realized, if we got that work done. So those are why we have those inputs there. Then we've got tools, expert judgment, analysis of data, and just meetings with our sponsors or stakeholders to make sure that everything's been closed. And the outputs are going to be an update or project document updates. It's really an update to the lessons learned register that we created when we were managing project knowledge. And then the final product service transition, us handing off the results of the project, a final report, and then updates to organizational process assets if those are required or necessary.